You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozar. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 29th of November 2013. Headmistress bans excited schoolchildren from mentioning Christmas until December. UK, polite white flight as culture divides us. PCSO sues property firm for thousands after tripping and injuring knee while investigating reported break-in. Cop scared by Swedish teen's sex crimes views. French court upholds sacking of veiled worker. Nick Griffin, MEP from the belly of the beast. Malta free to sell EU citizenship, Commission says. Syria, children targeted to force people to flee, Christian MP says. Women drivers responsible for social evil, Saudi Mufti says. China's new air defence zone suggests a worrying new approach in the region. Thought for the day, the dreaded I word. And finally, double glazing, the blonde way. UK news. Headmistress bans excited schoolchildren from mentioning Christmas until December. Jane Porter, head teacher of Whitehill Primary School in Gravesend, has defended her ban on Christmas. A primary school headmistress has forbidden children as young as 4 from mentioning Christmas, threatening to cut their playtime if they break the rule. Jane Porter has imposed a Christmas ban on all pupils and staff at Whitehill Primary School in Gravesend, Kent, until December. Outraged parents say their children are being punished over something they're too young to understand. Mrs Porter claims holiday excitement has been taking hold too early and is distracting the pupils at the Kent school. World at 8. The Garden of England again. Well, did she take the same view over Eid and Diwali and make accommodations for food over Ramadan? If so, she should be ashamed of her attitude towards our Christmas festival. If teachers can't stand up for their own religious rights, where does that put their classes? UK, polite white flight as culture divides us. Britain has become more sharply divided on ethnic lines, even as racial prejudice has declined, according to a new study. More than 600,000 white Britons have moved from London to areas that are 90% or more white in the past decade, and Liberals, left-wingers and right-wingers have done so at roughly the same rate. World at 8. Rather like when the TV reports with glee that umpteen thousand have fled England and that is why we need immigrant workers, when it is those people our people are fleeing from. Talk about cart before horse. PCSO sues property firm for thousands after tripping and injuring knee while investigating reported break-in. Merseyside PCSO Pauline Harrison is suing a property firm after injuring herself while on duty. A police community support officer is seeking £5,000 compensation from a property firm after she injured her knee while investigating a burglary. Pauline Harrison, 53, was responding to a 999 call of a break-in at a derelict school where she fell over a 3-foot-high wooden fence. The PCSO, who serves with the Merseyside Police, said she suffered soft tissue damage to her right knee as she tried to leave the property in Birkdale, near Southport. The case will reignite controversy over the millions of pounds in compensation claims fuelled by no-win, no-fee lawyers made by police who are injured on duty every year. Last night Miss Harrison's decision to sue was condemned by her own force. World at 8. Clumsy cow. How the hell can you fall over a 3-foot fence unless walking backwards? European news. Cops scared by Swedish teen's sex crimes views. Swedish police are concerned that young people's attitudes towards sex crimes are too lax, with officers in Stockholm receiving a significant rise in reported rapes in recent years. In the southern suburbs of Stockholm alone, there have been 90 reports of various sexual attacks this year involving victims under the age of 18. Police have put their foot down, claiming never to have seen so many reports of rape, especially gang rape, in their years on the force. It's as if the grey area of what's okay and what's criminal has become even more grey, police officer Mihailo Morden told the Dagens Nyheter newspaper. I'm not exaggerating when I say I feel scared at times during interrogations. It can be a very insensitive setting for both boys and girls. France. Paris opens new mosque in Gare d'Or to prevent Friday prayers in the street in multi-ethnic area. A new mosque was inaugurated Thursday in Paris's Gaudor neighbourhood just below Montmartre. The Islamic Institute of Culture will include 2 prayer halls, a cafe, hammam, bathhouse and spa, as well as spaces for concerts, exhibitions and theatre performances, and classrooms for dance, music, cookery and theatre classes. Paris Mayor Bertrand Delanoë inaugurated one of the 2 prayer halls today, while the second will be ready by 2015. The new mosque, located at 56 Rue Stevenson and directed by the rector of the Grand Mosque of Paris, Dalil Boubaker, is expected to at least partially solve the issue of crowds of Muslims who gather every Friday in the nearby Rue Murray and Rue Polonceau to prayer in the middle of the streets of this multi-ethnic area in the northern part of the capital. The situation has long been a source of traffic problems and disruption to public order. World at 8. I would have thought a notice against decency and deportation more sufficient. All these backsides in the air at once must cause some disturbance locally. French court upholds sacking of veiled worker. An appeal court in France upheld on Wednesday the decision by a Paris nursery school to sack an assistant who refused to take off her veil at work. The decision comes as France's ban on wearing the full face veil in public goes before the European Court of Human Rights. Fatima Afif, a nursery assistant, was sacked in 2008 by the Baby Lou crèche for refusing to remove her Muslim headscarf at work. In March this year, her dismissal was overturned after an appeal court said it constituted discrimination based on religious convictions and must be declared invalid. That decision was lambasted by many in France, where the wearing of religious symbols or clothing in public, state-run schools has been illegal since 2004, as a dark day for secularism. But Afif's sacking was invalid because the crèche was a privately owned business rather than a public school. The Court of Appeal was asked to look again at the case. And on Wednesday, the Court of Appeal in Paris delivered the verdict those supporters of secularism had been calling for when it upheld the original decision by the nursery. Malta free to sell EU citizenship, the Commission says. The European Commission said on Wednesday it has no power to stop Malta or any other member state from selling EU citizenship. Member states have full sovereignty to decide to whom and how they grant their nationality, its Home Affairs spokesman Michel Cocconi told press. He added that the EU court in Luxembourg has confirmed in several cases that it is for each member state to lay down the conditions for granting citizenship. His remarks came after Malta on Tuesday passed a law to sell its passports for €650,000 each. World at 8. That should appeal to Chinese immigrants only. They are the only ones with any money, but they probably would rather come to here than Malta. I now hand you over to Nick Griffin MEP, who talks today about the violation of civil rights in the European Union and his travels across the steppes.
It's a rather rough and ready World at 8 from me this week because I've only just got back from Russia. I've been in Moscow for 2-3 days, primarily there for a meeting and a press conference about the violation of civil rights in the European Union. We hear an awful lot in the controlled media about alleged violations of civil rights of militant gay campaigners and similar people, the Greenpeace vandals, in Russia. So myself and my old colleague Roberto Fiore and several Russian lawyers and nationalists decided to put on a counter-conference explaining that plenty of people's civil rights, good people's civil rights, are violated in the countries of the European Union, including, of course, Britain. My contribution at this meeting, we'll actually publish it fairly soon, but my speech through a very, very good translator covered 3 areas primarily where people's human rights are violated in the West. One of them being the very politically incorrect case of the revisionists. I mentioned, for instance, Zundel, who some of you will have heard of. He may be right, he may be wrong, but it was certainly wrong to hold a pacifist campaigner in a Canadian prison cell for 2 years without the light ever being turned off. and then imprisoned him in Germany for 5 years just for having a very unorthodox view of some of the history of the Second World War. I mentioned also Horst Mahler, who's a 73-year-old German lawyer. He was found guilty of Holocaust denial in 2009, and for that offence, which if you think about it is purely about words, purely about the interpretation of history, he got a 12-year prison term. Imagine giving a 73-year-old 12 years in prison. It's effectively a life sentence. You're getting out of here quite possibly in a box. So when people talk about the violation of human rights in other parts of the world, Ukraine and Russia and so on, give a thought to those people locked up for having an unorthodox opinion. I then moved on and talked about the experience I've got from speaking with and working with a number of constituents and other people in Britain whose children have literally been snatched by the state, by the social services. Hundreds of thousands of kids snatched from homes, not just because, as sometimes happens, they're being brutally beaten by their parents when obviously social services have to intervene, but increasingly kids are being taken on the grounds of what the social services claim is the chance of future emotional harm. A completely subjective analysis, and of course, how on earth can really anyone seriously pretend that putting kids into the British care system, riddled as it is with bullying and paedophilia, how can they claim that that is going to do anything other, in fact, than probably impose enormous future emotional harm? But that's the way that Britain's going. It's an enormous abuse of the human rights of those children and their parents and grandparents and so on, and it goes on all the time. I gave specific reference to the case, the truly shocking case of Tony McLeod, dubbed by the press the EDL mum, who had 4 children snatched and put up for forced adoption, despite the fact that the social services accept that she's a good mother, that the children wanted to stay with her, but purely on the basis that, having been involved at one stage with the English Defence League and still friends with patriots, she would bring them up in an environment in which they may be radicalised when they were older, thereby that being, according to the social services, a possibility of future emotional harm. So let's get it straight. People's kids being taken off them because they have the wrong political opinions. How much greater violation of civil rights can you possibly have? Roberta Fiore and I both covered in our speeches the shocking police attacks on the Children's Rights March in Paris earlier this year, where approximately 1 million patriots, nationalists, traditionalists, Christians, and many of them families with their kids, including children in pushchairs. I went on the first one of these marches myself, and I can vouch for the fact that they're extraordinarily peaceful, decent family occasions. But the second one of these was attacked by the police on the orders of the socialist government with batons and tear gas. Now, this wasn't a march of dangerous radicals. The slogan that they were marching under was, "A child needs a mum and a dad." But of course that message doesn't go down well with the militant homosexual lobby and with the anti-family, anti-tradition, anti-Christian, anti-human socialists who use gay rights as an excuse to break up families and deny children the right to a mum and a dad. So for marching under that slogan, peaceful people, good people, decent people were brutally attacked with tear gas and police batons. Nothing in the press about it, virtually not covered anywhere outside of France, and even there it was played down. So can you imagine if 1 million militant gay rights protesters were battened and tear gassed in Moscow? We'd never hear the end of it. But when it's family rights protesters, when it's Christians, when it's people standing up for the rights of children to have a mum and a dad, well, they seem to be fair game. So an enormous amount of hypocrisy in the West over the question of civil rights. We also invited to this conference a spokesman from Golden Dawn, and we were very pleased when they sent a young and very correct, very proper, very intelligent MP. Artemius is Christian name. I can't remember his surname because, of course, it's unpronounceably Greek. He came. He gave a very good presentation. He also brought me a letter from the leader of Golden Dawn in prison, thanking me for speaking up on behalf of their rights in the European Parliament, which was a very nice gesture. It's packed in a suitcase at present, so I can't read it to you, but perhaps I will in due course. The following day after the press conference, I did a pre-recorded hour-long interview for People's Radio. This is a nationalist and Christian radio station in Britain with literally many millions of listeners. Sorry, in Britain. That's what comes of having no sleep on the plane over. People's Radio, of course, dear oh dear. The People's Radio is a radio station with millions of listeners all over Russia. And I did, as I say, an hour-long interview with them, which they seemed very, very pleased with. We covered some very wide-ranging ground, and it went very well. That, of course, I was speaking in English, so I'm hoping very much that I'll be able to get a recording of the full original in that. So while there's be quite a lot of Russian in it, there'll also be what we're talking about in English, the questions and my answers. So if we can get it, that may well be something that we'll run on our website as well. I also had a number of meetings with various nationalists, especially to discuss something they're very keen on, the possibility of really active cooperation between nationalists and patriots in Russia and in Central and Western Europe. They're really not isolationists. They're very much on our side. They've got a very high regard for the British National Party. We talked in particular about the possibility of running joint youth training events in terms of ideas and practical campaigning techniques. And I also had a very interesting discussion with a group of people from the People's Radio. They're looking to launch a TV station. They're really quite well financed, looking to launch a TV station quite soon. And we were discussing the possibility of making our BNP TV material available to them, which they were very interested in, and I hope that it's something that we can work together, because in the end, I'm sure you know, well, you're listening to World at 8 and it's part of this, we nationalists absolutely have to build a seriously effective alternative media, and that obviously shouldn't be confined to one country. It needs to be international, and let's face it, Russia is now and is going to be even more in the future an enormous part of the struggle for our kind on this planet. So cooperation is absolutely vital. There is, of course, at present a real push by the Zionists and the neocons and the United States to hijack European nationalism. The main spear point of this is Geert Wilders in Holland. He's a brave man, but he's a total Zionist. He's not a nationalist, he's a free market liberal. He's an American puppet. And unfortunately, Marine Le Pen has seen fit to take the Front National into alliance with him. It's a great shame, given, for instance, Jean-Marie Le Pen's and the whole party's staunch position against the Iraq War, whereas Wilders and his people were, of course, all in favour of the Iraq War. So I think that Marine Le Pen will one day find she's made a terrible mistake by hitching her star to the neocon liberal Zionist Geert Wilders. But as she has done, it's particularly important that the real nationalists of Europe, which to my mind of course includes Russia, work together and stand together so that there's an opposite pole, as it were, in this nationalist position. Yes, there'll inevitably be this very well financed, very well organised Zionist attempt to make us go and fight their wars, but real nationalists need to work together to give people a real working alternative to that for the good. The good news in Russia is there's a lot of very good and very well connected people who understand the fundamental geopolitical reality of our time. And that's very simply that we, to use the BBC term, the hideously white people, are 8% of the world's population and shrinking. When you understand that, you've got to see the relationship between Russia and Britain, France, America and so on as not being a question of West and East, still less of West versus East. What this is now about, really, is the North, because that's what we are, collectively. We're the north of the world, not the west and the east. It's about turning the tide so that the north remains what it has been for thousands of years, the homeland of the race that gave mankind freedom and the rule of law, the homeland of those people who made the modern world and will yet reach for the stars.
Thank you very much, Nick. Intriguing to say the least, and well worth listening to. World News. Syria, children targeted to force people to flee, Christian MP says. A young Syrian Christian MP has accused rebel forces of targeting children and schools in government-held areas, especially ones with a Christian majority population. Some 11,000 children have already died in the conflict, but the Syrian deputy, Maria Sadar, in Rome to meet with Pope Francis and raise awareness in the West about what is really happening in Syria, said they have now become a target for al-Qaeda-linked and jihadist groups fighting to overthrow the Damascus regime. There have been 5 attacks alone on Christian schools over the past few days, injuring and killing children, she said, claiming that it is a strategy to get Christians who are secular and moderate to flee the country. Some 450,000 of the just over 2 million Christians in Syria have left that country. Sadar blames the media for the slanted take on what happens in Syria. It is not a war against the regime as the international media have long portrayed it to be, but a war to destroy the Syrian state by a group of extremists and criminals controlled by foreign powers, she said. World at 8. Exactly right. Women drivers responsible for social evil, Saudi Mufti says. Top Saudi cleric says issue of granting women right to drive is not a major concern. Riyadh, the Grand Mufti of Saudi Arabia, said a ban on women driving in the conservative Gulf state protects society from evil, in remarks published in the press on Thursday. Sheikh Abdul Aziz bin Abdullah Al Sheikh, the kingdom's most senior cleric, called for the matter to be considered from the perspective of protecting society from evil, which according to him included letting women drive. China's new air defence zone suggests a worrying new approach in the region. The announcement by a Chinese military spokesman on November 23rd sounded bureaucratic. Any aircraft flying through the newly designated Air Defence Identification Zone, ADIZ, in the East China Sea must notify Chinese authorities in advance and follow instructions from its air traffic controllers. America's response was rapid. On November the 26th, Barack Obama sent 2 B-52 bombers to fly through the new zone without notifying China. This face-off marks the most worrying strategic escalation between the two countries since 1996, when China's then president, Jiang Zemin, ordered a number of exclusion zones for missile tests in the Taiwan Strait, leading America to send 2 aircraft carriers there. Plenty of countries establish zones in which they require aircraft to identify themselves, but they tend not to be over other countries' territory. The Chinese ADIZ overlaps with Japan's own air defence zone. It also includes some specks of rock that Japan administers and calls the Senkaku Islands, which China claims and calls the Diaoyus, as well as the South Korean reef known as Lodo. The move is clearly designed to bolster China's claims. On November the 28th, Japan and South Korea sent aircraft into that zone. World at 8. Trust the Chinese, bulging at the seams again. Most of our newer migrants are Chinese. Africa is being repopulated by them, and they still have a huge empty countryside and a non-immigration policy for the rest of the world. Lovely. Thought for the day. Now they're all talking about the dreaded I word. You must have noticed that everyone, well practically all the politicians, from the smallest and least significant to the so-called big boys of Parliament, about the dreaded and least used word in the English language, that of immigration. When you compare the usage of this word to the lambasting of the racist word, and the former is the excuse for the latter, then they're not too far apart. I would go so far as to say I would reckon that at least 90% of our economic troubles with our laws and corruption are down to the people who have taken advantage of the immigration laws, both ours and those imposed by the EU. If we didn't have many of these immigrants in this country, we obviously wouldn't have those particular problems. Maybe a different subset of problems, but not those. What they euphemistically term net migration is on the rise again and up to 182,000, because these people are fleeing the Eurozone. Looking at the grinning oafs in queues at Calais to come over here, they're all male and most from the most depressed areas of Europe and the Middle East, and all more than capable of breeding and bringing over more of their tribes. I would say to anyone who states the opinion that we would all be more accepting if we were all intermarried and looked the same, as they are entitled to their opinion. But you can imagine a country or an island, as we still are, people by a darker shade of pale and looking the same even with wonderful African bone structure. No, neither can I. The points against that are so numerous as to be uncountable. First, the Tower of Babel and my old pal Nimrod, and the biblical reason we are all created different, but all in God's image, which must be 2 arms, 1 head and 2 legs minus tails. The old American Indian version, which I personally love, that Gitche Manitou made man by baking them in large ovens. The black man, he cooked too much, except for the palms of his hands and the soles of his feet on which he rested. The white man was too pale and not cooked enough, but the red man was cooked just right and looked good. Lovely, innit? The ancient Egyptians were not of mixed race, but an entirely different tribe and now extinct race. The fellaheen of Egypt are nothing compared to them now. African tribes were not as numerous in days of old as thought. Some further to the north had Semitic blood and others more aboriginal in looks and colour. Some still have lovely bone structure, but a mixture is not recommended. The albino look is not desirable. There are 2 other points to this statement. Many, if not all of these people don't want to produce a mixed race child. It still isn't the most desirable thing to grow up with, especially in the poor areas it's often undertaken in. For example, sink estates and poor single females barely educated themselves, and all open to gang and drug cultures. Not a thing to encourage. Although, to be fair, the media are encouraging miscegenation at a rapid rate. You won't see a white male without a black female or mixed race, or a white female without the same male version. This applies to whatever form of advertising, from building societies to beds. And the Debenhams Big Gift event catalogue, free in all papers, shows a small white girl with a lovely looking little fuzzy wuzzy headed guy grinning from ear to ear, handing her a prezi. In all TV series and movies, they all show black or mixed race partners, and all manner of presenting this to the public has and is being done. So the message is clear from the school of common purpose. Marry and breed, but not with one of your own, but with another tribe, and preferably one from thousands of miles away. This message is meted out to schools, universities, colleges, work, entertainment, sports and you name it. If it would work, they would harp on it for the elderly as well. But a country full of odd-coloured people with no idea of traditions or culture or whose history to learn is not my idea of fun at all, and totally against the human environment. We were meant to be different, and viva la difference. Now, I'm not against people of colour because of their colour. I would still prefer the days when, if you wanted to immerse yourself in African culture, you could go to Africa or a museum. At least that way you wouldn't be killed if a Christian by Muslims or put to work by the Chinese if you happen to be black. I don't like the world getting smaller because it means it's uneven, and by that I mean that the world is getting smaller whilst the third world is growing daily in people, and most if not all those people want to come to the UK because we are soft touch Britain. I've always stated that most if not all these peoples are better off or could be in their own countries, and certainly England would be better off if massive immigration had never been undertaken as a charitable work by our various governments. I personally love the cultures of foreign countries, but I don't want to walk around a corner and find little Bangladesh or Somalia in my local Tesco's. Call me odd if you like. By the same rule, a country peopled entirely without fail by my own tribe or tribes would be rather odd as well. But the cure to that is to keep a relatively small amount of early immigrants who have settled and contributed to this country and keep tabs on them. The answer is not to intermarry or interbreed. Many, if not all immigrants don't want to mix the races, and why should they? You see thousands of mixed-race African children up for adoption because their fathers love and leave their mothers with monotonous regularity, leaving poor little mixed-race babies to be paid for by the state, alias you. But all are up in arms over the Eastern European migrants due to come in the new year. Wake up, Britain! They've been coming over here for donkey's years. The EU has just made it easier and more official, that's all. Now I don't want any more of anything, whether that be from the Indian subcontinent, China, Middle East, Far East, Arabia to Poland or Slovakia. I don't want them, and you don't need them. Our older migrants, the Asians, are up in arms because they fear their outbreeding programme for Muslims will be held up or beaten by the Poles. The Turks are afraid of their criminal gangs being outrun by the Slovakians and Eastern Europeans, and the EU beggars on our streets will be outgunned by the Romas. So thus we will have our tribal wars, not of our doing, but in our country. And if civil disruption ensues, then who will get the blame? Not the immigrants, not the lefties bringing them in, but the far right. Yep, that is you and me and all right-thinking personas in this country if they leave their TVs long enough to actually think. Surely the thought has occurred to all of you now of what is in progress. Total domination and genocide is alive and well. Didn't you wonder why all the hype over having the first West Indians, Ugandan Asians, Hong Kong Chinese and the flotsam of the Arab Springs? Most, if not all, could have gone back at some time, and most of them do, but they return here for benefits. We as a people would have banded together if we had been faced with tanks, soldiers, guns and a bona fide invasion on our shores. But this way really has baffled even the most intelligent people amongst us. Why? It has been insidious and applauded by the media and authorities, and racist not to have accommodated the rush of foreigners. In fact, our councils get more money for foreigners than they do for us. Think on that for the future. You can get any amount of financial help for any sort of group, committee or think tank if you open it up to ethnics. Say no more. The powers that be knew that England could never be invaded, as France was in the last war, so it had to disguise the invasion under the guise of asylum, help, foreign wars and the Schengen borders bit, all to enable a foreign invasion over the last 50 years. This invasion hasn't started with the Romas, but it may well end with them. And finally, double glazing the blonde way. Last year I replaced all the windows in my house with those expensive double pane energy efficient kind. Today I got a call from the contractor who installed them. He complained the work had been completed a year ago and I still hadn't paid for them. Hello? Just because I'm blonde doesn't mean I'm automatically stupid. So I told him just what his fast-talking sales guy told me last year. That these windows would pay for themselves in a year. Hello? It's been a year. So they're paid for, I told him. There was only silence at the other end of the line. So I finally hung up. He never called back. I bet he felt like an idiot. You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozar, and I and the team at World at 8 and Radio Britain wish you all a very happy and a very safe weekend. While investigating reported break-in. Merseyside PCSO Pauline Harrison is suing a property firm after injuring herself while on duty. A police community support officer is seeking £5,000 compensation from a property firm after she injured her knee while investigating a burglary. Pauline Harrison, 53, was responding to a 999 call of a break-in at a derelict school where she fell over a 3-foot-high wooden fence. The PCSO, who serves with the Merseyside Police, said she suffered soft tissue damage to her right knee as she tried to leave the property in Birkdale, near Southport. The case will reignite controversy over the millions of pounds in compensation claims fuelled by no-win, no-fee lawyers made by police who are injured on duty every year.
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozar. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 29th of November 2013. Headmistress bans excited schoolchildren from mentioning Christmas until December. UK, polite white flight as culture divides us. PCSO sues property firm for thousands after tripping and injuring knee while investigating reported break-in. Christmas. A primary school headmistress has forbidden children as young as 4 from mentioning Christmas, threatening to cut their playtime if they break the rule. Jane Porter has imposed a Christmas ban on all pupils and staff at Whitehill Primary School in Gravesend, Kent until December. Outraged parents say their children are being punished over something they're too young to understand. Mrs Porter claims holiday excitement has been taking hold too early and is distracting the pupils at the Kent school. World at 8. The Garden of England again. Well, did she take the same view over Eid and Diwali and make accommodations for food over Ramadan? If so, she should be ashamed of her attitude towards our Christmas festival. If teachers can't stand up for their own religious rights, where does that put their classes? UK, polite white flight as culture divides us. Britain has become more sharply divided on ethnic lines, even as racial prejudice has declined, according to a new study. More than 600,000 white Britons have moved from London to areas that are 90% or more white in the past decade, and Liberals, left-wingers and right-wingers have done so at roughly the same rate. World at 8. Rather like when the TV reports with glee that umpteen thousand have fled England and that is why we need immigrant workers, when it is those people our people are fleeing from. Talk about cart before horse. PCSO sues property firm for thousands after tripping and injuring knee. Cops scared by Swedish teen's sex crimes views. French court upholds sacking of veiled worker. Nick Griffin MEP from the belly of the beast. Malta free to sell EU citizenship, Commission says. Syria, children targeted to force people to flee, Christian MP says. Women drivers responsible for social evil, Saudi Mufti says. China's new air defence zone suggests a worrying new approach in the region. Thought for the day, the dreaded I word. And finally, double glazing, the blonde way. UK news. Headmistress bans excited schoolchildren from mentioning Christmas until December. Jane Porter, head teacher of Whitehill Primary School in Gravesend, has defended her ban on